Welcome to our next video about the grade 9 student experiment where we start to discuss the write-up that you've got to do. This is part 1 of 3 where we specifically look at the research and planning section. This particular assignment is modelled after the expectations of year 11 and 12 to give you an idea of what's coming in future years. So, first learning intention, understand how we write up this major practical assessment task, and specifically we're looking at research and planning. So by the end of this, you should have an understanding of what you've got to do in this first part of your assignment for you to write your report. Recall the task is you're given 3 unknown samples and you have to identify what they are. On this screen is the modified ISMG. An ISMG stands for Instrument Specific Marking Guide. It's basically the guide that we use in years 11 and 12 that comes from the QCAA. We've sort of modified this a little bit, simplified it a lot for you, but still giving you the flavour of what you can expect in years to come. You can see that there's 3 main sections, which is the research and planning, the analysis of evidence, interpretation and evaluation, and the 4th section is the communication section. You can see that the first 3 main sections are out of 6 marks and communication's out of 2, but we put you into, I was going to say one of 3 categories, but it's actually 4. You either get 5, 6 marks, 3, 4 marks, 1, 2 marks, and one would hope you don't end up in the 0 category. All right. So we basically put you in one of these categories for all of these things, and it gives us a sort of a rating that we give you to mark out of 20. So drilling down, the communication section I'll talk about, and then I'm going to go through the research and planning. Communication is a fairly straightforward one, and it really isn't that hard for you to get the 2 marks here. When you look at not just the criteria that it's talking about, when you look at the actual things that we're looking for, is your writing fluent and concise? Very well constructed layout, legible, high quality, good quality references. If you have no references, then we start to think you might be down there. If you have spelling mistakes and things like that, then it's going to be hard to get the 2 marks. And really, it's not that hard to fix those things. If you write your document up in something like Word, it literally underlines the words that are spelt incorrectly, and you can just right click on it and pick the right one. All right. If you proofread this, if you have somebody else proofread this, it really isn't that hard to get the 2 marks here. Okay. I'll talk a little bit more about references a little bit later in another video, but the quality of references does come into it, and so long as you don't use websites that aren't reputable or sources that aren't reputable in any way, ones that look a bit dodgy, then you're pretty much on track to get the 2 marks here before you even start. Now I want to talk about the research and planning, and you can see listed here are the major things that we look for throughout this for this particular section. You're going to have a rationale for the experiment, which is kind of like your introduction. You're going to have a modifications and a methodology for the experiment, and management of risks. Now I spoke a little bit about risks in the last video, but think about the 3 terms there: considered risks, adequate risks, or inadequate. Obviously, if you don't do anything, you're going to be down here, but it's not that hard to put in the risk table that we've given you in the workbook sheet that goes with your assignment. You literally just fill out what are the risks, why they are risks, and how do you actually deal with it. And as I mentioned last time, have you written just 1 or 2 simplistic statements, or have you actually detailed, for example, when we're using glassware, it could drop, it could smash, don't put a stopper on a test tube that's creating a gas under pressure because it could explode, and so on. All right. But look, for these other sections, like the rationale, I'll talk about first. Have you given us a clear sort of story as to why you're doing this study? All right, and you're not doing it because you're at school and we told you to do it. There is a reason for actually doing it, and it's about identifying those unknowns. So let's drill down a bit more into some of those. This particular section comes out of your assignment and gives you a bit of a framework for how to write this up. Specifically, this video, I'm going to talk about these sections here, and we've matched this up with write that essay paragraphs, paragraph styles, and sentence styles to help you do it. And if you follow that format, you can't go wrong. You'll definitely get your 2 marks for communication if you make sure your sentences are proofread, and you'll actually start to tick off a lot of those criteria for the rationale, the research question, and the method and so on in your assignment. So the rationale, what's it all about? It's your introduction to your study to tell us why you are doing this thing. You can think of it as telling a story, and it's almost like you start with your past experiments that you've done. We did some of these experiments to identify hydrogen gas, to test pH, forming precipitates, things like that. Give us a bit of background about what these tests mean. And what you're ending up doing is leading us to a research question. I'll talk about the research question in a minute, but that's kind of like your why for doing this. I mean, your whole overall aim for doing this thing is to identify the unknown substances. So think of this rationale as a story of, we did these characteristic tests, here's what they mean, or here's the reactions for some of them, with a reference. Hence, what we're now going to do is apply that to identify some unknown substances. That's kind of the flavour of what this thing's going to say. It's only about 250 words, about 2 paragraphs. All right. Think of it as 1 paragraph you can discuss the previous stuff you did, and 1 to explain how you're going to use this and modify it and identify our unknown samples. The write that essay paragraphs we've suggested for you, the multi-purpose intro is a good one, and then you can have a look at the hammer paragraph or the lawyer paragraph, and those styles will help you really drive home the why of what you're doing here, which makes sense. So this is all just a story about what did we do before, what's the science behind that, and how do we then apply that to our new scenario and what we're going to do next, which is identify our unknowns. So how do you find these write that essay paragraph styles? Just Google write that essay login. Usually it's the first one that comes up, click on him and log in with your details. If you don't have those, speak to your teacher, they'll help you out with it. Once you're there, where that yellow arrow's in the middle there, click on that one, is usually the easiest one to go to. There's multiple ways you can do this, but this is probably the easiest, most straightforward way to help you out. Paragraph creator is the one you want. Click on that one next, and you come to this page here. Now on the left hand side there you've got all the different paragraph styles that they've listed, and on the right hand side you've got a bit of information. You can see I've ticked multi-purpose introduction because that's where you would start, and it gives you this little thing over the side here which basically outlines the structure of the multi-purpose introduction paragraph. Start with a neutral sentence, a context, some argument, and some summing up. Alright, there's other things over there as you can see, you don't need me to read those out, but you can other stuff to help you out. Now, this outline that we've got here is going to be expanded a little bit. So when you click on the draft up the top there, it brings you to a new page, which is a bit like this. And basically, these things are all listed down here on the page. So when it says neutral sentence, say something about your topic, etc. You literally just type in here your text. Type it in there as a sentence. If you're not sure what to do, it does suggest some sentence styles, and the sentence styles are down here. All right. So for the first one, it says suggesting a simple sentence. If you don't know what that is, there he is right there. You click on that, and it'll give you all the info. So you fill your stuff in those 4 boxes there to complete this paragraph. A bit like that. Now, I will point out, notice on the first one here, I put a capital and a full stop and used a sort of correct punctuation for a sentence, but on this last one I didn't, and I did that for a reason, okay? So when you've typed all those out and you're happy with what your 4 parts of that are, you go to preview, and it puts it all together here, and literally you can copy and paste this text into your report. Notice the lack of punctuation there that came through onto this screen. As I said, write proper sentences on the previous screen, and literally this bit is just cut and paste straight into your report. So once you've written your rationale, the next heading that you're going to have, so the first heading is rationale, the next one's going to be research question. These titles here are your headings that you have in your report. So your research question, we're looking at these particular sentence styles, but essentially it is your overall question for what you're trying to do. All right? You're trying to answer the question of how do we identify these unknown samples, but that's not a really good example. You can use the W start sentence, or we've suggested the power sentence. When you click on those on that previous screen, gives you more detail about what that sentence actually looks like. W start obviously starts with W. How or what can we do to identify unknown samples? But that's not really specific. You want to be sort of as specific as you can. I mean, for example, you're not just looking at unknown samples, you're looking at 3 unknown samples from a given list. Things like that. All right. Try and make this as specific as you possibly can, and I highly recommend you show your research question to your teacher. So you've got your rationale. The next heading is your research question. The next bit is your method. You'll have a section for methods, and then the next title will be risk. Method's fairly straightforward for what you've done all through your high school science life, written in third person past tense. So for example, none of this I or we thing. You don't say we did a pH test. You can just say in past tense like you've already done it, because you have. When you're writing this, you've already done the experiment. A pH test was conducted. Something like that. All right. Go for about your 200 words. But what will make your life easier is include that planning flowchart that you would have done back at the start. So it's kind of like that thing where you said, we'll do a pH test first, which will give us an acid, a base, or a neutral. Okay, for example, in the bases, you either had the smell or you had the precipitate test for the 2 different ones. There was a couple of tests to identify your 3 acids and so on. All right. Put a flowchart in like that. And just say, we conducted a number of tests were conducted, sorry, don't use the word we, according to diagram 1. And then this can be your diagram 1 that you include. All right. It's useful to put that in there because your diagrams and images do not add to your word count. You should tell us about modifications, and this is an important bit moving forward into senior years. All right. You've done these experiments before. So what are we actually doing? What's the actual modification and why are you doing it? So you want a paragraph or even just a sentence or 2 here that says, we did these experiments previously, now we are applying them to identify an unknown sample. And that's the reason you're doing this thing. Make sure you've got some statement there that justifies how the straightforward experiments that we did in class are now being applied to this. When you do your risk section, that is the risk assessment table, which comes out of your workbook that I spoke about in the last video. And again, tables don't add to your word count. All right, that's the end of this. You should have a good idea of how to do this now and how you can get your rationale, research question, method, and risks written out. Thanks for your time.